I think this was a very interesting meeting that we had today, in which, if I can draw a simple line, I can say that the technology, when we get to digital medicine and its application, is not an issue, it's not a barrier, it's not a challenge anymore. Technology is there. And we have been following the presentations one by one, and there is no issue as well in the potential application of technology. We have been hearing from top managers of big pharmas. We have been hearing from top managers of digital medicine companies. So I think this is now clear. Technology is out there and ready to be implemented. Of course, when it comes to implementing new technologies, there are other types of barriers. And I think we heard from Giuseppe Recchia quite systematically, even if into one single country scenario, but it can be representative of the overall situation, that barriers can be at the acceptance level by the regulatory system, and further on the field at the acceptance level by national health systems, which is the same to say by payers. So we have structured this roundtable to be as interactive as possible. So I would like speakers to keep their presentations very concise and sharp, to leave some space for discussion. And of course, I encourage the audience to post as many questions as you want. Even during the presentation, we will try in between presentations to discuss about the questions. Unfortunately, I have to report that our first speaker, Vincenzo Palermo, who is the Oncology Vice President from GSK Italy, for a personal situation, he cannot be with us. And we concurred with Vincenzo that he would have triggered this round table with a specific stimulus. So Irida, if you can show the slide that Vincenzo had prepared for us, maybe I can go through it and we can start the discussion from there.
Of course, give me a minute.
Yes, a minute is too much. A few seconds. I'm joking. Okay. I think that if we look at this slide, it summarizes a bit, even if in the field of oncology, and we have been seeing that the oncology is not the only sector in which these things can be applied, these new technologies can be applied. It is clear that if we can solve the barriers by means of applying innovative digital solutions, we can give relevant support in all stages of care. Buzzword this time is the support to the patient journey, end to end. As a clinical oncologist myself, as a surgical oncologist, I know that the journey of the patient only starts at the moment he or she is treated at the hospital, but the real journey starts from that moment onwards. And fortunately, in this period and in the year to come, and potentially in the next 2 years, many treatments will be available that are based on the assumption that treatment can be prolonged for all life long. So we are in a way breaking the paradigm that you get a treatment for a certain period and then you get a follow-up with no treatment and then another treatment. New molecules are hitting the market, and these molecules allow for chronic treatment, and this is expected to have a huge impact on significant endpoints, especially in oncology. This sort of approach, of course, triggers new questions, triggers new challenges, because any treatment brings toxicity. Any treatments brings adherence issues. So the digital support to all of this can really solve these problems. So if we give this as the starting point of the discussion of this roundtable, you will see, while I present the speakers, that we will try to understand if the application of these solutions and how the application of this solution can be eased, can be facilitated in a way. And we will hear the perspectives of who is in charge of putting in place validation pathways for new technologies in the market, to arrive to the end with the voice of a patient, so that we can close the overall fil rouge of the meeting by really bridging the technology through the regulatory and national health systems acceptance and payers acceptance, finally to the patient, to the benefit of the patient. So we will try to see how these players see this bridging that we have been discussing on up to now. So if I may, I would start calling the speakers. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Benedikt van Nieuwenhove, who is the president of the Belgian Association of CROs. He has a very long lasting experience in the pharmaceutical industry. And this experience is particularly underlined in the field of teaching how to plan, how to implement, how to run clinical trials. Benedikt is in fact the manager and the founder and the manager of the European Center for Clinical Research Training in Ghent, Belgium. So Benedikt, the floor is yours, and if you can respond to the stimuli that we got during the meeting, and of course, tell your position about all the topics that we have discussed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alfredo, for this kind introduction. I'm happy to be here because my main reason to be here is indeed with my hat on as president of the BeCRO, the Belgian Association of CROs. And there precisely, similar to what you heard earlier today with Alan Yeoman, say from UCROF level on European level, as a professional organization of service providers doing clinical trials, we believe strongly in partnerships between the different stakeholders. And that precisely then makes the link between what you said, making the bridges in order to break through the silos which is the theme of today. So I'm happy actually, and I'm very grateful for Innovation Sprint to organize this meeting, because this offers us an opportunity to get together. And maybe even I can be as blunt as saying, maybe there's not even silos anymore already. So I think there are already bridges made as we have here heard today. So that makes me very happy. Again, BeCRO, professional organization of a number of companies involved in carrying out clinical trials. And also we, on a Belgian level, we do work a lot with all the stakeholders to improve the environment. We talked about the environment in terms of regulations. We are sitting down and lobbying with regulators to make sure that the climate is like allowing what we all discussed today here. So, and in that respect, I think we as BeCRO can actually be one of the bridges to build those partnerships. And the way we do this is we have several working groups. We have, for instance, a working group on digitalization. We have a working group on decentralized patient-centric trials. So we have several working groups where we work with the members and the stakeholders to allow to make those bridges. And with that, actually, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have on our level, and if we'll be happy to also discuss how BeCRO can help you continuing to break down those silos.
Thanks a lot. This is very nice by your side. And okay, I would have questions because when it comes to implementing innovation into real-life clinical research, there are many steps that have to be done, no? And these steps, maybe you can reply after the next speaker because I will challenge both of you. These steps are partly scientific, partly technological, and significantly economic. Because bringing new things on the market in the clinical research, we know how much it is costly when it comes to drugs, but it is costly when it comes to digital solutions as well. So as a physician, as an entrepreneur, I see another barrier that we have not been discussing, which is how do we fund this sort of development at the scientific and technological level? You know, it's the innovator's dilemma. How can we break this barrier to get as quickly as possible the funding which is needed to scale up rapidly and to get to the level that we can formally test into the clinical research scenario? Otherwise, we cannot, in a way, use the same paradigm that we use for drugs. Of course, COVID vaccines are an exception. We cannot wait for a digital content to be validated 10 years, as we do for drugs. So it's a way of a riddle in the head of physicians and entrepreneurs, how to speed up this process. Do we do it at the regulatory level, so we reduce the red tape, and by this we make it less costly? Do we underline the need to invest money in this? And in this sense, the collaboration with Big Pharma is, of course, a must. So I really look forward your answer, and if you want, you can answer after next speaker, which is exactly in the field of financing innovation, as you want.
Yeah, feel free to introduce the next speaker. I mean, maybe you can jointly answer that.
Yeah. Discussion. Okay, thanks a lot. So next speaker is Sophie Lineart, which is the, sorry for my French, is even worse than my Dutch sometimes. Sorry. She's the project coordinator at the MedTech Accelerator, lifetech.brussels, which is the accelerator that is following Innovation Sprint in its first step, that was following Innovation Sprint in its first step. So Sophie, you heard my question already, and you heard my stimulus to trigger the discussion. How can we accelerate the uptake by the market of innovative solutions in the digital medicine scenario? Please.
Thank you very much, Alfredo. I don't know, may I share some slides with the audience?
Sure.
All right, so maybe just to make it clearer, maybe. Let me see, this is my screen. All right. Can you see it?
Yes.
Full screen? All right, perfect, thanks. So I will come to your question, Alfredo, right? Just I will give a small presentation. What is LifeTech Brussels all about? And then I'm gonna talk about the acceleration program so that you, the audience can fully understand what it's all about and how we accelerate projects and the go-to-market. So let me just switch. I also have two screens. Okay, there you go. So LifeTech Brussels at a glance, it's basically it's a cluster. So we are part of the Brussels Agency for Business Support. And we are the public health cluster of the Brussels region. So we are a team of 5 people, and we basically help 150 plus innovative health tech startups. Health tech meaning digital health and medical device startups. And we are also surrounded in the cluster by a pool of 250 plus supporting intermediaries. And actually for us, BeCRO is definitely one of them as well. Hi, Benedikt. So in this pool, what we have is we do have research centers. We work with TTOs as well, technology transfer offices. We work with investors. We work with experts meaning legal experts, IP experts, business experts, MedTech experts, and so on. And we also have institutional actors like Finance and Invest Brussels, for example, that is supporting us and supporting our entrepreneurs. So the mission that we have at LifeTech Brussels is concretely, what do? We do have individual and collective coaching sessions. We do have workshops. We do networking. We help empower the ecosystem as well and connect people with one another. And we also help entrepreneurs prototype. So we do have a prototyping center, called the MedTech Atelier, where we help them build non-functional prototypes, MedTech prototypes. We also help them develop connectors to the Brussels Health Network, so making sure that projects are interoperable with the network. So that's what we do. And one way to, no, first of all, that's another slide just to show you an infographics from ECH Alliance that I really like, because it's also summarized what we do at a smaller scale. So connecting actors around patient and making sure that doing that, we accelerate the go-to market of innovative product, innovative solutions. And we also have this, talking about ECH Alliance, we also have this connection to Europe, since Hub Brussels also host Enterprise Europe Brussels, which means that we help entrepreneurs internationalize, and we coach them in this way, in this regard, and help them look for funding and so on coming from Europe. So as I said, we help entrepreneurs, and we do it in several different ways that I'm going to show to you right now. So we help them, for example, engage in feasibility studies with research centers. We help them meet subject matter experts and key opinion leaders, which is super important so that they can get access to actionable knowledge, be it business or health tech knowledge. We help them question their solution with coach as well, which means that they need to get out of their comfort zone and they need to shake up their established certainties in order to move on. We help them test and validate their solution with healthcare professional and patient, as I said. So they need to understand the market. They need to get out of the lab and access the market quicker doing that. So we help them also to connect to the Brussels Health Network, as I said, get investor ready and get support for public relation as well, get visibility nationally and internationally, and we help them sell value on top of selling a product or a service, and much more. And one of the ways to do that is the acceleration program that we are running since 2016, and that Innovation Sprint actually took part to in 2019. So far, this program is a Brussels initiative which has been developed with key actors of the field, so entrepreneurs, but also healthcare professionals, federation, and so on. And what we do here is that we provide collective and individual coaching to early stage entrepreneurs willing to boost the development of their project with the help of experts and dedicated coaches. So we make sure that actually they connect the dots, they meet the right people in the field. And actually, to come back to your question, Alfredo, I think that's what is the most important, is making sure that actually all the pieces of the puzzle are connected so that they can raise money as quickly as possible. But they need to be aware that there are a lot of obstacles when it comes to entrepreneurship at first, but also when it comes to entrepreneurship in the health tech sector, because there are a lot of stringent regulation that they need to comply with, and it's changing quickly. So that's definitely a hurdle that they have on top of maybe other entrepreneurs in other sectors. So we make sure that they're aware of that, and we are raising awareness since 5 years now. We have had 5 editions of the program, so it's a 4-month program each year. We already had 42 startups and projects. They have a commercial readiness level, technological readiness level of minimum 3 to enter the program. We have had 150 plus experts and mentors helping us, 22 health verticals, meaning a 22 field of medicine that we helped in this program. So people developing, solution in 22 different fields, mental health, orthopedics, hepatology, you name it. And more also in the program, we integrated a focus on digital health. So now 15% of the program is dedicated to digital health as well, because we see that more and more solutions are MedTech solution, but connected MedTech solutions. So they also exchange data, and entrepreneurs need to be trained, and we need to raise awareness about that as well. So data collection, data storage, data privacy, data security, of course, and the pyramid that Alexander was talking about earlier on as well, definitely. So I think that's all. I hope I answered your question and that I wasn't too long. And thank you very much. Next edition, March 2021.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Thank you. Of course, this was very, very straight to the point answer, but as well feet on the ground for entrepreneurs. So Benedikt, having heard this before moving to the next speaker, having heard this, how do you see the interaction of trained and supported entrepreneurs by Accelerator with CROs clients? So can CROs be sort of a bridge to provide clients with very innovative solutions and maybe advocating for this sort of solutions?
Absolutely. You're spot on, actually, because looking at BeCRO now specifically, we have a lot of members that are indeed in the digital arena. In addition to being a CRO, and CRO stands for Clinical Research Organization. So the CRO is a specialist in carrying out clinical research, clinical trials. And per definition, they then also involve like the new technologies. They have the networks of investigators, and above all, access to patients. And I think there, in addition to all what we discussed here, connecting people and partnering to accelerate development and to make it, because you mentioned that 10 years of development, which we won't have, it will also come down to, especially in the development phase, to finding the study participants, the patients, as soon as possible, and keep them in the trial and keep them engaged. And that's where CROs come into the play, well, because they're used to do this, and of course, all the digital tools and ways of doing it will help in that, provided that we can get their engagement. And we started the day with the statement that we should do this with the patient in the center, because we are not going to be able to do this if we don't have the patient with us, and they're not going to engage in using the digital technologies for their healthcare in a clinical trial setting. And the advantage precisely is going to lie in speeding up recruitment in the first place. Maybe an interesting number, on an average phase 3 trial, 1/3 of the duration of a trial is only for recruiting patients in the trial. So imagine that we can reduce that time, so it's already 1/3 of your development time that's gone. right? That is shortened. So recruitment would be speed up. We could speed up recruitment on the one hand, and even more important, I would say, we could also influence the retention in trials, which is also an important element. And in order to have high quality data, you need enough patients. And if they drop out, you're losing power in your study. So an important element here where we have to bet on, if I can say so, would be that aspect, to continuously engage the patient with the help of the CROs for the entrepreneurs.
Of course, yes, of course. Yeah, and this comment triggered some curiosities, but I will leave this for my final question to the whole panel. Thank you very much, Benedikt. So now, if I may say, if CROs are the engineers of clinical trials, there are architects of clinical trials, so professionals that, in a way, think about new technologies, a new way of using technologies, and are experts in innovative clinical trial design. So I think this is the case of our next speaker, who is Serge Bodart, the Chief Commercial Officer of IDDI, which is a company providing innovative clinical trial design. I have been told that Serge is connected from Canada, so good morning, Serge.
Good morning. Good afternoon to you.
Yes, good morning. And so I know that you have a presentation, a short presentation, but I want to trigger and to stimulate you with a question to start with. So you are an expert of ePRO and eCOA, where ePRO, of course, is electronic patient-reported outcome measurement, and eCOA is electronic clinical outcome assessment. And as well, in here, the technology is not an issue. We have the questionnaires, we have the technology, we have the sensors. But what is the best way to optimize the validation of ePRO into strong clinical endpoint, so that then you can use them into smart and innovative clinical trials? This is my first stimulus to you. And then I have another one, but for the end of your presentation. Please, Serge, and thanks a lot for being with us.
Thank you, Alfredo, and good afternoon to all of you. Just to report, here in Montreal, we have minus 15 degrees this morning, and a little bit, I hope it's better in Belgium. Well, like Sophie, I would like to share my presentation that will answer your question, Alfredo, and let me know when you can see my screen.
Oh, yes. This is Montreal. Yeah, sure.
No, it's not, unfortunately. So, yeah, I wanted to start, I will take this from a clinical trial standpoint, because clinical trial, well, Benedikt already started talking about it, about CROs. It's a special beast, clinical trial, and it's an extremely regulated beast. And so you have to understand why is it so difficult to implement technology in a clinical trial. And I want to take 5-6 slides to show you why we have so many difficulties. Already, Alfredo, you took, of course, by definitions, perfect. I don't have to do this. Clinical outcome assessment, patient-reported outcomes. That's exactly what the FDA is, where the FDA is confusing us with all kind of acronyms that they put in regulation. Clinical outcome assessment, you can read it here, any assessment that may be influenced by human choices, so it's really subjective, judgment, motivation, and may support direct or indirect evidence of treatment benefit. And clinical outcome assessments can be, there are 4 types: patient-reported outcome, and I will only define this one, the rest after that we will quickly understand. The patient-reported outcome is a measurement based on a report that comes directly from the patient or the study subject about the status of a patient's health condition without amendment or interpretation of the patient's response by a clinician or another health professional. So it's really the patient reporting something about his or her quality of life, for example. I put an example, you might be familiar with that, a health status SF36, it's questionnaire, 36 questions, very long, sometimes confusing for the patients. Then you have the clinician reported outcomes the same thing, but reported by clinicians in this case. So you are asking questions to the clinicians about the patient functions, and a few examples here. Then you have the observer reported outcome and the performance outcome. Observer reported outcome, it's same as a PRO, where the questions are answered by the parents, for example, in the pediatric trial, or for elderly patient by somebody who's living with the patient. And then performance outcome, a good example is the 6-minute walk test. So we count the number of steps that the patient can do in 6 minutes. So that's probably more objective than subjective. I wanted to put this because I'm going to use COA and PROs in the rest of the presentation. And don't worry, it's not going to be technical. I want to concentrate on how can we bridge those different entities, eHealth, Digital Therapeutics, and clinical trials, and what is the difficulty there especially. Look at the eCOA industry landscape. So just for clinical trials, it's two years old, but you can do the math, and since it's an annual growth of 16%, you can see that it's not a lot of studies that are using electronic clinical outcome assessment. So capturing patient feelings or using a tablet or a phone, a smartphone, it's not a lot. It's only 1,500 studies that use eCOA. Interestingly, less than a fourth of the clinical trials using COAs are capturing these data electronically. So there are still, paper is still there in our industry, unfortunately. I've been in this industry for 20 years trying to eradicate paper. Well, 20 years later, paper is still a gold standard, actually. But there are initiatives to encourage collecting data electronically, and I wanted to cite these one maybe as a reference for attendees here who might not know about this. The Critical Path Institute. It's an American institution, non-profit organization. They are there to foster development of new evaluation tools and standards for drug therapy trials. But more importantly, it's a neutral third party that bring the industry, academia, regulatory authorities for pre-competitive collaboration and sharing of scientific data. So it's science, but with the different stakeholders. And there are two important consortia in this, well, too important for me. There are other important consortia, but for other people, the PRO consortium. So that's a group of 26 members, and those 26 members are exclusively pharmaceutical companies, and large one. And that group is in charge of qualification of patient-reported outcome measures. So those questionnaire, quality of life questionnaire that are built, so they are in charge of developing new one and accepting those in clinical trials. And then you have the ePRO consortium, where you have 13 members. Most of them, 90% are technology providers, eCOA providers, or well, it's moving a lot. So there are also CROs there that are involved, because CROs, as Benedikt mentioned, are also involved in technology. And those people are in charge of developing eCOA best practices. I think that's important because you see that there are people coming together to develop some content about that. But you can ask, why is it so difficult? What are the barriers to adopting electronic tools in clinical trials here? And this is the result of a survey to the PRO consortium. So remember, 26 pharmaceutical companies. And these are the main aspects that came from that survey. It's difficult to use eCOA in a clinical trial because it takes a lot of time to prepare for eCOA for a study. And a lot of time means they need sometimes 3 months to develop a questionnaire on a platform. 3 months today, it sounds absurd because we can put a questionnaire on a platform in a couple of hours maximum, but there are other aspects that makes it complicated and that takes a lot of time. The cost is still outrageous. A clinical trial for a phase 3 trial using eCOA, and I'm talking only eCOA, you're looking at $1 million for that trial. So it's outrageously expensive. Site receptivity burden was also one of the barriers. You know, the sites, very often, we have to think about those people. We give them once it's an iPhone, the day after it's, well, like here on my desk, I have 3 phones, I have, those guys, that they have even more than that. And so they are, of course, not, they're reluctant accepting the new technology because it's, again, they have to be trained and it takes time, it takes money. So the right site receptivity. Same thing with the patient receptivity, patient burden. Imagine 85 years old people who have to use their smartphone. It's becoming better, much better than 20 years ago, but still for some patient population, it is a burden. Training also, and then data integrity, device failure, paper backup. Very often, when I started this business 20 years ago, the eCOA industry, we were failing our trust because the technology was not there. The technology was failing. You know, my smartphone was crashing every 5 minutes. How do you want to record a questionnaire if your smartphone is crashing? Not gonna work. So, but today it's much better, I think. And then those were the barriers that were found by the PRO consortium, and we responded. The ePRO consortium responded to those barriers. How can we move things forward here? And it was really about first starting collaboration between the different stakeholders. And I think that's the point here for us as well, between eHealth, digital technologies, and clinical trials. Talk to each other because very often we are misaligned. We saw that in the eCOA world. Sponsors, CROs, providers, sites, patients, all have different expectations from the technology. Develop best practice. It's easy. Putting a questionnaire on a smartphone sounds easy. Well, no, it's not that easy. You have, because an instrument, a patient-reported outcome measures that has been developed by a scientist has some properties, psychometric properties. When you migrate that questionnaire from paper to electronic format, you have to make sure that those psychometric properties are maintained and that you are still capturing the same thing as with the paper. Otherwise, your questionnaire has no value. Yeah. So those are aspects that we develop in the ePRO consortium. So, and I summarize these, what's so special about eCOA, what makes it difficult? Those questionnaires that we are using in clinical trials are validated questionnaires, as I mentioned, with defined psychometric properties, very often used as primary and secondary endpoints. That has been the change from 20 years ago, where the patient was not really at the center of the trial. It was more the investigator. Luckily, we have changed that. There's been a shift in the last 20 years. Of course, now the patient is at the center of a clinical trial. And more importantly, I think it's at the center of all stakeholders here present today, eHealth, Digital Therapeutics, and clinical trials. That's something we share together. The patient is at the center of everything we do here. It's for the well-being of the patient, otherwise it's useless. So very often primary endpoints are used through eCOA. There is a lot of guidance from the FDA. EMEA is following more or less the FDA. Lucky us, at least we just have to focus on one. There are different eCOA technologies. We have smartphones, you have tablets, you have computers, and smartphones, different operating systems, different way to present things. So that makes things difficult when capturing patient data. All those measures, they belong to instrument owners, so scientists, and they put a copyright on it. That makes it also very expensive because each time you want to use their questionnaire, you need to pay a license for that. You need to ensure version controlling because those questionnaires are changing very often. So you have to make sure that the one you will deliver to the patient is the correct version, that it is collecting the right thing. So that's why all this, it takes up to 16 weeks before we can implement an eCOA solution in a clinical trial. And I have not spoken about translations because there we start again. Translating a questionnaire means translating forward, backward, reconciliation, making cognitive interviewing, usability testing with the patient, making sure that the patient understands the translations. That takes months before we get it on board on our platforms. And then I have talked too long already. So this is my almost last slide. measurement comparability. That's exactly what this is about eCOA. When you are using, I will take the first one, the vision analog scale. You might be familiar with the visual analog scale. A VAS is it's on paper, 10 centimeters, very often used for pain, where the patient will indicate how much pain he or she has. And then the site will measure where the dot is on the scale. Well, you could do that on electronic format. But what is the comparability? Is it still valid? Is the 100 millimeter on paper equivalent to the 55 millimeter on my smartphone? Is it not? So you see the point there, and this slide is all about this. EQ5D5L is an instrument, is a questionnaire developed by Euroqual. Also, how do we measure the comparability of those instruments on different platforms? And then, of course, today, BYOD, bring your own device. Everybody's trying to use the patient's phone. Do you know what type of, my parents are still using a Nokia phone. Do you think we can put a questionnaire on a Nokia phone? That's not gonna work, of course. So we have to keep that in mind when we do clinical trials. And this is my last slide. So our bridge is the patient safety and well-being between eHealth, digital therapeutics, clinical trials. We have something in common, we share patient. But I think what we need to do now is bridge also the stakeholders, the different actors, talk to each other and develop and follow best practice and then encourage publication, because that's how we are going to be able to use clinical trials data or eHealth or digital therapeutics data into clinical trials and vice versa. Thank you for this long presentation.
So,
ending it at least.
So thanks a lot, Serge. I think you more than answered my question, my initial question. I will trigger just a very brief reflection if I can. So given all these difficulties, not difficulties, these challenges that I have to say normally comes by regulators, because they really need, in Italian we say, to split the hair in four, because they need to make this waterfall precision approach. So how do you see using these measurements, all of them, in creating composite digital biomarkers? So can we think about creating models and then validating models on all these measurements in order to derive biomarkers that can then serve as clinical endpoints? And how strong these clinical endpoints can be?
Yeah, there are initiatives already to develop libraries of clinical outcome assessment, because I think that's the key. It's to have something that can quickly be reused in a clinical trial environment, but also in a digital therapeutic environment, eHealth environment, something that everybody can pick. For example, I was talking about the VAS. How can we use a VAS in all those three areas, clinical trials, eHealth, digital therapeutics? Well, let's put guidelines together, and when you need it, have a library, we'll pick from that library and you use it. Same thing for those questionnaires. We're talking about translations. Have a library with translations where we can pick from. Of course, it's going to cost money and somebody will have to start that, but there are initiatives that have started with the Critical Path Institute. I like them very much, because I think that they have done in the last 10 years a tremendous job at improving the connectivities between all those stakeholders, and by developing best practices in this really rigid environment, which is clinical trials, of course. So question will be, of course, how can we reuse data? Because it's really at IDDI, we are doing clinical trials, but very regulatory. We do biostatistics, so we analyze data from clinical trials. So, and the founder, for example, is against real world evidence, but that's exactly what eHealth and digital therapeutics is producing. It's real world evidence. So it's data after, you see, in an environment where the patient lives. How do we bridge that? I don't have the answer. We're not there yet, but we are progressing. I think by developing best practices and by talking to each other, I think that's how we're gonna get it.
So, okay, this gives me a big smile because it means that discussion is still needed and possibly harmonizing not only an open innovation approach from one side for the technological development, but even the lobbying. We need to be really horizontal in the lobbying activities that we need to do apparently at this
Absolutely.
at this level. So, and now we come to our last, but I think most important speaker of the roundtable, and the other speakers, please allow me this, because we have been talking during our meeting about patient journey, patient at the center of the situation. So I think it now comes natural that we trigger a reflection and a reaction by a patient advocate with a strong business professional background and a very active participation into the international bodies that take into account and the voice of the patient and voice this voice into the political discussion at the highest level. So it is my pleasure to welcome for this in this roundtable Dimitris Athanasiou. Dimitris is a patient advocate with a very deep expertise into rare diseases. So he's an active member of the top management of Eurordis. He's a member of the management of EUPATI, which, by the way, Dimitris, I know very well, with the head of European Forum of Good Clinical Practice, which is among the coordinators of the activity. He's a member of the European Patient Forum. He's a patient expert. He's an expert patient, and he represents this sort of scenario into the dedicated working group of the European Medicine Agency. So, Dimitris, I think it's your role now to discuss from your perspective all that we have been in a way presenting from the scientific, technological, regulatory, to understand how we can collaborate, how we can engage with patients. I have just one trigger, which is, of course, technical. If it comes to patient journey, real-world evidence seen by the perspective of patient can be a strong trigger for physicians and clinical research experts to put real-world evidence into strong play into clinical research. And if this is asked by patients, of course, there is another strong mean of advocating this perspective. Dimitris, the floor is yours. I don't want to use more of your time.
Thank you very much, Alfredo. Thank you, everybody. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I'm definitely not the most important, so I can guarantee you this. But I have somebody in the house, 9-year-old, that's very important. So I'm the father of that one. And since, first of all, I'm very, very happy, really, to be with you. And I can give you some real-world evidence of what Sergio was so nicely presented, especially from Duchenne. So 6-minute walk test that we saw as, let's say, an outcome. Our children that have muscular dystrophy, so basically I'm a father of a child with muscular dystrophy, so it affects, let's say, the muscles, it destroys the muscles, life expectancy is about 20s, it destroys your muscle. So we had a fantastic outcome measure, 6-minute walk test. If you walk this 6-minute walk test between, let's say, in these 6 minutes, you can do 350 meters to 450 meters, you can get into a trial. So if you can get into a trial, you might have access to a very expensive future therapy, possibly, because otherwise you're dead. So our children can walk precisely how many meters you want. Our American children take $50 for this. So you tell them, you walk 400. I promise you, 95% of our children walk 400 meters, even if they can do 1,000. So that's the validity of 6-minute walk test. What was the result of this? I think something like 20 lost trials that developed nothing. 2 products in the market, one in US and one in Europe, that are not commonly shared the access. So one is approved only in US, the other is approved only in Europe, both rejected in the other side of the ocean. That's the 6-minute walk test. How many billions, how many children and for us, how many lives? I can tell you thousands and billions in dollars we lost on this. So that's the one side. And digital outcomes are fantastic. We want them very much, but they have to be really, really tolerant for children and creativity, because we have some fantastic digital outcomes that you wear in your wrist in order to measure your activity, which is really good. We have two of them. In one, it was in a cat, and the other was in a dog. So you can say when you get the data back from these digital outcomes, that, for example, in one day, the kid was doing fantastic because it had it passed to the dog leg. So, you know, there are a lot of things that we should be, let's say, very, very focused. But as you said, I'm coming from a very particular, let's say, community. So Duchenne is not, it's a particular community. I have some slides that they might be useful to share. If everybody's happy, let's say, with that, I'll try the technology. I don't know if you can see my slide deck.
Yes.
Fantastic. So I will pass them very quickly, but I would like to show you also some ways that we can work together, because this might be a very interesting example. I will start from my disclaimers and disclosures and my DUI. So these are my personal opinions and maybe the guys you see here on the board. And disclosures, I have no real conflict, and my DUI is in the EMA website. So after that, I'm going to pass to the rare diseases. 50% are children. 35% of all deaths in the first year are from rare disease. 30% of them don't get to 5 years old, which means that we need drugs. In order to do this, we need you guys to do an amazing job, because from 2010, for 8,000 diseases, we have 169 drugs. In order for our children to get drugs, we need a couple of millenniums. And the unmet need also in rare disease, but also in pediatric cancers and neonatals, is immense. And we fail to deliver. And this is some interesting statistics from Martin Dellinger-Kremer. I think most of you know her, in the academy we had last week. So 50% are delayed to recruitment, because I've heard the recruitment. 85 retention, 40 billion loss. I come from finance, so you know this is the only sector that has this productivity level. So why? We have a fragmentation in effort. It was very nicely illustrated. We have a fragmentation of data, which is even dramatic and very costly in lives in rare diseases. We have problems with the diagnosis and the care management because we don't collect the data. We don't use the digital outcomes that we can use. We don't use the technology. Basic research, clinical trial design is a nightmare. You try to do for 7 children in a global trial, a placebo arm, and then we are wondering why we fail. Drug development pipelines, the failures are much more than the successes, and it's not most of the times because of the compound. We expect, and I think that was also discussed in EMA, that this is because of the lack of the poor design. Regulatory pathways, I think you have been there. Access pathways for us is an issue, and we definitely have to lobby, I like the word, in policy to change this. So the Duchenne example, as I told you, it's a very complicated disease, very lethal, very common rare disease. It destroys all your muscles, and it gets basically to your diaphragm and your heart failure, and we lose our patients. We got, let's say, the first Duchenne diagnosed 150 years ago. By 2000, we have developed some organizations trying to get somewhere. By 2020, we get 45 organizations, 38 countries. What we do with them, we fund 80 million per year on research and care. So basic research, animal models from mice, rats, pigs, dogs, monkeys with DMD. So we try to cut the middleman, basically. We develop digital platforms, clinical trial simulations. We finance heavily new biotechs, virus development like the AVV9, PROMs, PROS, care guidelines, HTA models, and other, let's say, exotic animals. In order to do so, we invested heavily in FAIR because we understand the value. So both our organizations, the World Duchenne Organization, which is the umbrella of the patient, and the foundation we have in Netherlands, also the Duchenne Data Foundation, which deals with data. The first one is advocacy policy regulatory work, part of EMA, part of Europe's NEPF, FDA and EMA connected. And we do drug development like this one, very early, let's say, research on brain and other, let's say, molecular biology researches based. We try to build platforms for the other ultra-rare diseases because we have to help them too. And remote and decentralized clinical trials that I've heard also in the previous slides. One of the interesting is the URNMD hub. So we try to collect data from all, let's say, the registers without silos, that we face a lot of problems with them. And the Duchenne Data Foundation, it does data research and training. Some of them might be interesting. I just kept some of them. It's the Duchenne map, that we try to map everything that moves and breathes in Duchenne globally, from research to centers to patients to all, let's say, the stakeholders. Duchenne Data Platform, a locker that collects prompts, GDPR compliant, presented in EMA with flying colors. They use it, let's say, to sell it as a good practice of patient-driven items. We try to build a data repository to collect and unify the data, mostly in a federated system, so we can share and reuse, as we said. But where we are now, so we developed a pipeline from 7 to 70 drugs. And this is not because Duchenne is sexy by default, but because everybody works very hard. Still, we lose all our boys. They live longer, but still we lose our boys. And we try to keep the rare disease and research and development in the regulatory discussion and the policy priority. The challenges that we all face, I think, and not only the patients, is enough data in patient management and care, unknowns in the disease trajectories, and this is something that we finance also in the CPAF, that I saw it was a very good example. Clinical trial designs, master protocols is critical. New, let's say, intelligent, innovative, and adaptive designs that will come from you, from the CROs, from the tech parts of, let's say, our environment. It will not come from the clinician. It will not come from the industry. Managing together maybe data issues, collection of reliable data, pipeline issues, visibility, serious problem, and this will lead eventually to access. So it's good for all of us and for the health system. So how we see the future is that we have to work together. As we described in the beginning, we have to build together a blueprint that we can develop these technologies, we can shorten the pathway, we can cut down the cost, collecting patient-centric, relevant, and reliable and interoperable data, and to do also for us evidence and database advocacy, but also for you if you want to have any future in the regulatory pathway, if I can wear, let's say, my PDCO regulatory hat. It will include a lot of work, but it's something that we can build together. And I think, closing, thank you very much for your time. I think what you said of how we can put, let's say, the patient at the center, I would say that we should start from the early beginning. So if we develop technologies that will bring later to the patient, we will have the failures we had so far. But we are involving, I know some of you, and I will soon talk to more of you, but I think that you are the innovators, and not so much in the technology, but in the thinking. So for us as patients, I think you are a trusted partner for us, and we really look forward also for you to review this in the same way. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dimitris. I think you touched so many points, and that for rare diseases, and not only, I think rare diseases, as you perfectly know, is a model for all other diseases. And I really hope that these technologies, of all the burdens that you have been mentioning, will dissolve, not solve, will dissolve the in silo attitude. Data sharing supported by distributed AI learning, for example, cybersecurity, blockchain technologies, all these sort of things will greatly help into a real data-driven approach that will give us actionable knowledge, hopefully in the very near future. Thanks a lot for intervention.